Welcome to Think Ahead, the podcast from London Business School that brings you cutting-edge research, real-world insights, and expert analysis to help business leaders navigate today's most pressing challenges. I am Sergei Guriev, Professor of Economics and Dean at London Business School. Today, I'm joined by two extraordinary guests, Lynda Gratton, Professor of Management Practice at London Business School, and Andy Briggs, Group CEO of Phoenix Group, the UK's largest long-term savings and retirement business. Together, we'll explore how rising life expectancy is reshaping careers, organizations, and society, and what it means for leaders today. Lynda, Andy, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Lynda, your book, Living 100 Years Life, is coming up later in 2026, in the fall of 2026. Please tell us about your work and what's driving your research on longer lives and careers.
Well, when Andrew Scott and I started to talk about the future of work more than 10 years ago, one thing that we really felt wasn't on everyone's agenda was what happens when everyone lives to 100. And that was a question that really animated a conversation between an economist and a psychologist, which is, by the way, a rather unusual conversation. And from that came our book, The 100-Year Life. And what happened to that book was absolutely extraordinary. It was translated into many languages across the world. More than 1 million people bought it. I don't know if they read it, but they certainly bought it. And at the same time, Andrew and I had an opportunity to advise governments, companies, and indeed to talk to individuals. Since then, the question of what happens when you live to 100, when I live to 100, when Andy lives to 100, really remained on my mind. And so what I've been doing since then is to think more deeply about how could we live a great life when we know we're going to live longer, but at the same time when we know that technology, particularly AI, is going to fundamentally change our lives. And for me right now, one of the most interesting questions is around how do I keep on learning when I know that the jobs I do are going to change all of my life. So when I wrote Living the 100-Year Life, which will be out in September, that was a question I addressed. It's a book that's written for every age group, from kids who are in our MBA students, right up to people in their 60s and 70s, because at every single age, we have an opportunity to live a more resilient and a life that's more focused on learning.
Thank you, Lynda. And of course, kids who are born today, on average, in developed countries are going to live to mid-80s or 90s. And as you said, our students, better educated, part of this cohort are probably indeed are already looking forward to 100 years life, so it's no longer an abstraction. Andy, as a CEO of the Phoenix Group and the former government-appointed business champion for older workers, what's your focus and why is longevity such a critical issue for you?
So Phoenix Group, where we are, as you said in the intro, the UK's largest long-term savings and retirement business. We're looking after £300 billion on behalf of our 12 million customers. And we see ourselves very much as a purpose-led organisation. Our purpose is to help people secure a life of possibilities, basically help people on that journey to and through retirement to have the retirement they would like to have. And the challenge we have in the UK, and true of many, many developed nations, is that the pension system was designed 80 years ago. It was designed 80 years ago for a life expectancy at retirement of about 10 years, and it kind of worked for that. But it doesn't work today. On average, people today would like to retire at 62. They realise in reality that might be unrealistic, and they think that they will therefore need to retire at 67. But even if they work towards a view of retiring at 67, only 1 in 7 will have a decent standard of living in retirement. And it's a problem that isn't clear today because the people actually retiring today have a large element of defined benefit pensions, but in 10, 20 years' time, they won't. So this is a real huge societal issue coming at us, and our core social purpose, what we stand for at Phoenix, is trying to address that issue.
Do you feel that people are aware of this challenge? You mentioned that some of them think that they will retire at 62, some of them expect to retire a bit later. Do you see that people have enough financial understanding of those challenges?
Not at all. Only 10% of the UK population get advice as they journey to and through retirement. So 90%, and the vast majority of that 90% will not have a good handle on what sort of lifestyle they're likely to have in retirement. They just won't have a handle on that. So this is it's not a massive issue right today, but in 10, 20 years' time, if we don't do something differently now, we will have a huge societal issue.
Right. Thank you. Before turning to Lynda, who just mentioned to us that she talks to business leaders and MBA students, I would like to come back to you about a very important challenge in this space. So in continental Europe, some countries believe that retirement age should remain 62. France just suspended the pension reform, moving retirement age from 62 to 64. So now it's frozen at 62 and 3/4. Germany is discussing a pension reform where the retirement age will move from 67 to 73. So there are very different views on this. And one of the arguments for low retirement age is physical work. So it's easy to talk to MBA students or academics that you can keep on working. What about people doing heavy work, which are still double-digit % of population? If you look at manual work, that would be, in some countries, even in some advanced economies, 30 or 40% of population.
Yes, so I think the first thing I'd say is with an aging population, so I've sort of covered the kind of savings side of it. Let's take a slightly different perspective on this. With an aging population, unless people work for longer, the tax burden is just going to keep going up and up and up. But also, the best solution to that impact of people living longer and that impact on tax burden is to drive economic growth. And a third of working age people in the UK are aged over 50, and yet people don't embrace them as potential workers. So there's a massive economic opportunity to keep people working for longer. Good work is good for you. I love what I do. I really enjoy it. I find it stimulating, and it's better for your physical and mental health. The specific about the manual work, I agree that's a challenge we need to face into, but what we need is a step change in focus on reskilling and transferable skills. I mean, I'll give you a couple of examples. Jaguar Land Rover, in a lot of their cars, they hand stitch the leather seats, and they were found that they had a workforce that was starting to struggle more with arthritis as that workforce aged. So they took a load of them and retrained them as trainers of the next generation of leather hand seat sewers. So just as a simple example, BT have done something similar, whereby people often will call up and there's a phone problem or a connectivity problem. With technology today, quite often it's not a case of sending out an engineer, it's a case of using phones and video calls. And again, they've retrained a group of engineers to be telephony based, video call based in order to respond and help and support customers. So how can you reskill these fantastic skills into areas that might not be quite the same demands of manual work?
So that links back to Lynda's suggestion that we need to acquire new skills, and in this particular case, less physically demanding skills. As a former scholar of economics of happiness and well-being, I would like to confirm what you've just said. Unemployment is actually bad for you, for your well-being, and when people get unemployed, lose their jobs, they lose much more happiness that would have been predicted by the loss of income. People want to be engaged and involved in the society, in the economy, and losing agency and purpose hurts their own perceived well-being. Lynda, coming back to you after this very important input from Andy, how does your research inform us about longer careers? What should we all do, and what should business leaders think about when we talk about longevity?
One of I think the biggest insights that we had when we thought about what happens when everyone lives to 100 is that, first of all, you have to work longer. You should be working longer. And, the economics of it is that you work into your 70s. But, of course, when you think about working into your 70s in a 3-stage life of full-time education, full-time work, full-time retirement, that's obviously not going to work. I mean, how could you only be educated once in your life when we know with AI and robotics that your job is going to change right the way through? And why would you want to retire and just spend loads of years on the golf course? Wouldn't you want to take some of those years and bring them back? So really what I'm sort of thinking is that you get this multi-stage life where education comes through in stages and the retirement also goes back in stages. So it's a life where you take time out, you spend time with your kids when it's important, you go on adventures, but you also work. You might start your own business. You might work as a freelancer. I wrote a piece just earlier on this year about how important freelancing is now becoming in even highly paid roles. So what's the interesting thing about a multi-stage life? Well, let me make just 3 observations. The first is it's got more activities. So there's more things in it, more stages. Secondly, that means more transition. So in a 3-stage life, there's only really 2 transitions. You go from education to work, work to retirement, 2 transitions, and you do them in lockstep with everybody else of your age. When you're building a multi-stage life, you're actually making it yourself. And there's a lot more transitions. And as our colleague Hamini Ibarra has said, transitions are themselves a capability. In fact, her recent research is looking at that actually the capacity to make a transition is a thing. It's actually a capability that all of us need to develop. And thirdly, and it comes back, Sergei, to your point about agency, and I'm going to use the word self-authorship, but it's the same point, which is to say, when it's a 3-stage life, we just follow everybody else. When it's a multi-stage life, we actually have to take a lot more determination. We have to write our own life. And the book that I've just finished writing is about that. It's about how do you become the author of your own life?
And how? What is your piece of advice for people who have grown up in the old 3-stage world and now need to make many more transitions and own their own rhythm, pace of transitioning from retirement to employment and back?
I've made 2 sort of observations and 2 points to the readers of this book. The first is that you need to change the way you think about your life. And the metaphor that I've talked about is weaving. Now, that's because I love weaving. So, how you sort of weave a life. And then I've said, you've got threads that run through your life. Some of them are about being productive, like mastery, or, learning how to use AI, call that amplification, or indeed cooperation. And some of them are about nurturing yourself, to do with things like friendship, which we know is crucial. You economists know that, how crucial friendship is in a lifetime. And also, being calm, having adventures. And so the first thing I will say to people is you need to ask yourself, how strong are those threads? Am I letting any one of those threads break? Because one thing that Andy and I found when we were working together on this research is that actually by the age of 50, lots of people just didn't have the skills to carry on working. Their productivity threads were beginning to weaken. So we have to keep on building those threads. And that takes me to the second part of the book, which basically says all of us, whenever we can, need to go through a reflective cycle that asks ourselves, who am I? Because we have to talk about our working identity. It asks, where am I now? What am I strengthening? What's weakening? And also, and this is the bit I really love, it's about what actions should I take now? But also, what promises should I make to my future self? I've just taught a class just an hour ago, and I asked everyone in the class, I didn't say, what would your 70-year-old self? I am actually, as you know, Andy, 70, and that just seemed like far too far away from them. I said, what would your 60-year-old ask of you now? Yeah. And that's about making promises to your future self. And so together, the idea that you're weaving a life and also that you're going through this iterative cycle of renewal, I think that's going to do it.
And can I maybe just build on that? Because I think businesses, organisations, employers have a critical role to play in this as well. I think this sort of 3-stage life is how a lot of businesses think about their workforce and employment. And they're missing a massive opportunity because we're big believers in diversity at Phoenix. We think if we're diverse, we better represent our customers and communities, and we make better decisions from a broader range of perspectives. And our view would be that actually age diversity in a workforce is probably the most important of the protected characteristics. If you are age diverse in your workforce, then you will perform better. You'll better represent customers and communities in which you operate and work. But also allowing these 50-year-olds to leave the workplace, and if they leave the workplace, they're the group least likely to come back into the workplace. You're losing a massive amount of talent at the same time, and we all need the best talent we can get in our organisations to perform well. So I think there's a really big burden here on employers to embrace different lifestyles, different approaches. 62% of over 50s say that if they had more flexible working, they would work for longer. Very often over 50s have care responsibilities. It might be children and grandchildren, it might be elderly relatives, and having flexible working around that is key. And I did pick up some stats on this, which I think just gives the scale of the situation. So the government has outlined 8 key sectors as part of its industrial strategy that are critical to economic growth. Every year, those sectors are losing nearly 500,000 over 50s coming out of the workforce of those key sectors. That costs the economy £31 billion per annum. So there's a massive economic cost of not embracing this as well.
And we need those 30 billion in this economy for sure.
We certainly do.
Andy, thank you very much for this. I can only confirm that generational diversity really matters. It matters both ways. As a dean of a school, I can tell you, as Lynda mentioned, we have students of all generations, including in their 50s, 40s, and 30s. And sometimes they complain about our students in early 20s being less well-behaved, challenging authority, not respecting, behaving in a noisy way. What I'm telling them, it's part of the offer. You're coming to this institution and you learn about the new generation, how they think, how they behave, what they think, how they perceive the existential threats that we all face. And this is part of the service, because these are the people you're going to work with, learn from. And so I think we can learn both ways from younger and older generations.
Totally agree.
So coming back to your point early, Andy, you mentioned that it's not money that motivates you. You work for purpose. So if you are in Lynda's class and Lynda is asking you what motivates you, what drives you, how would you respond to that question?
Yes, so I would very, very fortunate in that my parents gave me a fantastic upbringing, but my dad left school at 14 to look after his mum. I'm one of 4, youngest of 4, so my mum was basically bringing up 4 kids. It was the only way they could financially afford. They couldn't have afforded to sort of do childcare for my mum to work. My dad did night school over the years to progress in his career. And so, I've never been particularly money motivated, but had values very central to me. And I do, I get the 2 things that motivate me most. One is the difference we can make to the lives of our customers. If we do what we do well, millions more people will get a better retirement. But also the people, the colleagues in the organisation. So yesterday I was up in our Birmingham office. We do a regular, we call it Phoenix Live for all the colleagues. We have 5,000 employees in the organisation. And the last one of the year, we do awards for those colleagues that best exemplify our values, which are very customer orientated and working collaboratively across the organisation. And the sense of the energy I got from listening to the stories of these colleagues and seeing them go up on stage and get their awards. I mean, for me, it's just, I find that so energizing, so exciting, so fun. That's that's why I do it. I love it.
Without naming the names, can you share a story which inspired you?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a host of them. So we do quite a lot with Carers UK. It's one of our key charities because so many over 50s end up with care and responsibilities. Yeah, so someone swam 22 kilometres for Carers UK. Wow. But then you get stories where, for example, someone has sadly died, and we are supporting their partner. And you listen to the phone calls, and I do a lot of customer call listing, and the person can't stop crying on the phone when they ring us up, and our colleagues are just so caring and supportive to help them through that challenging time. And we don't always get it right all the time, but we try hard to. And so there's some really, really fantastic examples.
Right. We both agree that business can do a lot, but there is also a government side. You've been a business champion for older workers appointed by a government. Lynda, you talk to policymakers. How can business and government work together to address some of those challenges? Well,
interestingly, one of the things that I've done over the years is to advise the Japanese government. In fact, I was very fortunate to work in Prime Minister Abe's council And he created a council called the Council for the 100-Year Life, which was an astonishing thing for a prime minister to do. And for 2 years, we met as a council talking to each other. And this was made up of ministers, heads of corporations, entrepreneurs, and so on. And what the conclusion that we came to is that, it's great for governments to look at people in their 50s and 60s, but actually they've got to really look much lower than that. We have to actually start preparing people to be living a long life and to be working right the way through it. So governments can make decisions right now to encourage companies to recruit people over the age of 50. But actually what they've also got to be thinking about is how do we prepare the next generation, our children, to live into their 50s. And that's why one of the things that happened in Japan is our book was made into a manga so that people could look at it. But there was also mangas made for young people in schools. So now in Japan, The 100-Year Life is a manga for teenagers. In fact, I just wrote something 2 days ago for teenagers in Japan. So we have to also realize that whilst governments can make immediate decisions to help, they've also got to be thinking about how do we prepare people.
Just building on that, it seems to me it's really essential that businesses, government, but also like the London Business School, research organisations, for example, all have a critical role to play collaboratively across this. And so, one of the things we did at Phoenix was we set up our own think tank, and Lynda kindly was a member of it, alongside former politicians, people from the House of Lords. So we had a real breadth of experience there, and we did a lot of research on what it would take in order to change the pension system in the UK, to address the challenges of people working longer. And that informed a lot of our interactions with government. And we've actually seen a lot, so the government has set up a independent pension commission to look at pension adequacy in the UK. They've introduced a new regime, the regulators working with government, called targeted support, to address the fact that only 10% get advice as they journey to and through retirement. But these things only come about with sort of commercial businesses, excellent research capability, and government all collaborating and working together. We're so much stronger together if we work collaboratively to common goals. None of us can do it on our own. It does need that collaboration.
Can you share more examples from your own think tank's research that surprised you and were influential in changing the views?
It was a marvelous think tank. And I think from your perspective, Sergei, as the Dean of a business school, what it showed is how important it is when business schools collaborate with organizations. And you, Andy, set up this astonishing institute. And you did because you have this, great surveying capability around, and you also have, lots of networks. What we began to learn was all sorts of interesting things. So, for example, we found that people in the UK, quite a lot of them over the age of 50 were coming out of work because they just didn't like the work. And that's pretty interesting. What is it about work that you don't like? The other thing that really fascinated me is that the Institute set off a whole bunch of experiments to encourage people to think more long-term about their lives. And what we found is that turns out to be much more difficult than we'd imagined. Like running a half-day workshop, which we did. We did all sorts of different things. But running a half-day workshop to tell people it's really important, they think about the future. They leave the workshop saying, what a great idea. Do they do anything? Very much not. And so we also, and this is why, the new work that we're going to be doing at London Business School about living longer lives really has to also address the question, what does it take for somebody who knows that they've got to work and live longer to actually do something about that?
Yeah, Lynda refers to a landmark 25 million gift we just received to set up an endowed research institute on longevity and business. And indeed, we'll do a lot more research on this. And I fully agree that long-term thinking is one of the most important cultural traits that drives economic growth and investment and prosperity. There are global surveys that show that this is the most important correlate between where incomes and growth are located in the world. And different cultures, of course, have different views on this. Now, another thing which I would like to bring up is technology. You, Andy, mentioned how for over 50s it's important to have flexible working hours. We've now learned that we can use technology to allow people to work from home, to maintain their own pace of working. Lynda, you mentioned that people don't like to come to work because some bits of work are routine and maybe automated, especially now with AI. You mentioned Japan. In Japan, driverless cars are now becoming an important tool for older people to be able to commute to work when they no longer feel safe to drive, right? So technology may actually help this transition to living and working longer. What are your views on this?
Well, it was interesting, Andy, that when you talked about technology and when you talked about older people, the examples you gave from the two companies were both to do with robotics. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really going to be, we think about AI quite a lot now about technology. I think the real push will be when we use robotics, because very often, it's just you're tired. People are tired. They can't do these things. And I think that what we're going to see over the next 5 years, would be my prediction, is enormous investments in robotics. We're already seeing that in Japan. And I think that will make it much easier for people over 50. I can't believe we're calling people over 50 old.
I'm 60 in March.
I know. Well, I was 70. I'm 71 in February. I mean, we are not old, are we, Andy?
No, definitely not.
No,
I still think
not.
For our listeners, neither Lynda nor Andy look old.
No, I mean, so let's not call the over 50s old. But nevertheless, I think it's robotics that are really going to make a difference. Andy, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Yeah, definitely embracing technology. But for me, a lot of the issues are actually broader than that. I think that I think the flexible working is so important. And I mentioned carers. So, for example, I'd advocate strongly that organisations should have a strong carers policy. At Phoenix, we offer all of our colleagues 10 days paid carers leave every year, but also very strong flexible working around it. A classic scenario is someone is suddenly in their 50s responsible for a dependent elderly relative. And if work just has to stay the same and it's still the same hours, no flexibility around it, they very often they can't cope, and they will say, well, I can't do both. I need to look after my mother or father, say, and so they'll stop working, and then they're the group that are least likely to come back to work. So it's lose all round. The person loses, in terms of the ability to save and the benefits of work. The company loses that long skills and capabilities that person brought to the organisation. The economy loses as well. So I would say that flexible working is really key. But what we found as we've introduced it was really important to train our people leaders to embrace that flexible working as well. So you can have all the policies you like, but if it still feels uncomfortable to work flexibly, then people won't. If managers don't embrace it, encourage it. And I do think technology, it really does transform the ability for us to work flexibly. If I think, prior to, COVID was horrific in many, many ways, but we did learn quite a lot about presenteeism, about the ability to work flexibly to use video calls. And our organisation, we don't mandate office days. People come in a lot because they like the social interaction. We tend to find Fridays, people are actually really productive on a Friday, working at home, catching up with things. They do have a number of meetings, but they also kind of clear the stuff from the week, prepare for the week ahead. I do the same very often myself. I go in sometimes, I'm sometimes working at home. But that flexible working and using technology as part of that, I think is a game changer in keeping over 50s in work for longer.
Yeah, the recent data from Transport for London show that people travel much less to work on Monday and Friday. So we have de facto embraced this approach already.
And Andy's point, well, I think I've taken two really important points out of Andy. One is just this point. One is we all need to remember that if somebody leaves work at 50, they don't come back in again. Mm-hmm. That's 20 years of lost. Mm-hmm. And the second point is about flexibility. And of course, what we're realizing is we're thinking that flexibility is for people in their 50s or 60s. Actually,
it's for everyone.
It's for everyone. Yeah. In fact, the people who most need flexible work are people with young kids. Mm-hmm. I mean, those are the people who most need it. And, I wrote a book straight after the pandemic called Redesigning Work, which was and is about the importance of really asking ourselves, why are we working as we are? Could there be more flexible ways of working? And what we know is that, when people have some opportunity to work flexibly, they're less likely to leave their job. We have hard data. I'm not saying that working flexibly makes people more productive. I think the data on that is very unclear. But one piece of data we absolutely have is that retention rates are significantly higher for people who have flexible working. And those are the 50-year-olds we want to retain.
But that in itself is a productivity gain because the cost to an organisation of hiring and retraining or training someone new into a role compared to someone who's already in the role performing well is substantial.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Andy mentioned something very important, Lynda, which is managing flexible hour working team. Your work is mostly on the flexible hour workers. What about research on managers of people who work flexible hours?
Well, actually, redesigning work is all about work. It's not really about, it was a book written for organizations, or not that organizations read, but, managers of organizations. And what it really says is, it takes a different set of management techniques to be able to manage a hybrid workforce. It means that you have to think more about accountability. Andy mentioned earlier the notion of presenteeism. You have to let go of the mindset of presenteeism. You have to think more clearly about what are people accountable for? How do we measure their accountability? How do we make sure that it's fair? So this is a whole new set of management capabilities, which I think, since the pandemic, managers are building those capabilities. I think it's really very much part now of what it is to be a manager.
Yeah, no, I agree. Two builds. The first I'd say is that we try and have a really strong focus on outcomes in our organisation, and therefore, we're not as focused on the inputs. We're focused on the outcomes, and people are accountable for delivering outcomes. Yeah. The other thing I'd say is I still think there is a lot of skill in the individual people leader, being able to understand what is going on for someone in their lives. Yeah, everyone, all ages, there's stuff goes on in life. Yeah, and as a leader, if you can help create an environment where you understand what's going on for people, you can support that. So some of the obvious examples, as you were saying, Lynda, where people have young families. And I'd like to think across our organisation, if someone it's their day of the parents for the school run, everyone will be very supportive indeed of that and work around it and flexibly. But that's sort of the obvious examples. But there's often, we've had a couple of colleagues who have, teenage kids that have been really, very seriously poorly recently, and it's quite easy for people to come to work and bottle that up and not talk about it. And, it's so much better for them if they can talk about it and we can make the right adjustments to support their circumstances, their position at that point in time. It takes so much more stress off of them. They equally feel a real sense of gratitude to the organisation for supporting them through a tough time, which means you keep them for longer, the productivity is better, it works all round.
What is very special about intergenerational dialogue and understanding people with generational and age challenges is we're all growing older. So it's different from people from different backgrounds, different cultures, failing to understand each other. In terms of generational challenges, of course, whoever is young today will be older tomorrow.
Exactly.
Whoever is 50 today should remember that I will be 60. I will have to care for an older relative, and you remember how you yourself had a teenage kid. So I think once we remind people of that, people will probably have easier time to be more understanding. Right.
So I'm learning a lot at the moment. I've got my business manager at work is a big AI user. So I regularly, what are you doing there? How do you do? What's that? How's that work? And I'm learning hugely on embracing AI myself and using AI. I definitely could do a lot better. I'm only on the early stages, but I'm looking to learn, trying to learn, and anything that gives me a few more hours in the day will be very well received.
The good news about AI, you can ask AI how to use AI.
Exactly.
And that will be a very useful answer, actually.
Yeah.
So we are coming towards an end of our podcast, and in the end of each podcast, we ask a signature question. And today, the signature question is simply thinking ahead, how can business leaders design organizations and careers that enable people to thrive as a part of 100 years life? Lynda?
Well, I think that organizations help people thrive by providing and designing work that's meaningful. One of the threads that runs through a long life is mastery. And mastery is about learning something deeply and really becoming skilled in it and becoming proud of it. So I think the quality of work is probably the most important thing that a company can do. How do you provide work for people that they enjoy, that they learn from? They can become reskilled and upskilled. For me, it's about the design of work.
Yeah, and I completely agree. I'd say three things I'd call out. Exactly that people's careers will evolve over time, and therefore embracing reskilling and transferable skills as part of that, I think is really key. I'd say more broadly, organisations will perform better if they embrace diversity in all its aspects, but particularly generational diversity, I think is really key. And then I think, as Lynda was saying, this sort of three-stage education, work, and retirement isn't the way it is anymore. And so organisations really helping their workers, go through those kind of squiggly careers, go through those different paths they have in life, and empower them to make the choices and decisions, flexible for them to make the choices and decisions as they go through life, I think will be great for the individuals, great for the business performance, and great for the broader economy.
Thank you very much, Andy. Thank you very much, Lynda. And thank you, our listeners, for joining us on this episode of Think Ahead podcast with Lynda, Gratton, and Andy Briggs. As life expectancy rises and careers lengthen, sustaining energy and purpose is no longer optional. It is essential. We hope that this conversation has sparked ideas for how you can lead and live for the long haul. Share your thoughts on our channels using #ThinkAhead. To stay connected with the latest insights from our faculty and global leaders, visit london.edu/think. And don't forget to follow and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thank you for listening, and until next time, keep thinking ahead.